Oh, I've been waiting for this one. Because today we're gonna review Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. What's up, dudes? Max here, and I wanted to do a comprehensive review of this game because there's a lot of reviews rolling around right now. There's a lot of impressions of what the game was from E3 leading up to what it is now. And I've already said a lot about it, but I really wanted to compose my thoughts into something that focuses on everything that the game offers in terms of sound, in terms of design, in terms of art style, in terms of online, and everything like that. Put it together, and I think we can give a pretty fair review of Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. So, let's go. First and foremost, the biggest thing that needs addressing is the graphics. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite is not a gorgeous game by any means. Many fighting games nowadays really extend their graphical stylings through their art style. Even games that are kind of shortcoming in terms of what graphical prowess they have for textures and poly counts can be made to look a lot better because of an extremely awesome looking art style. Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is an amazing example of that. However, many of the lifeless backgrounds in Marvel Infinite, as well as character models that seem to be under the quality of things that Capcom made back in like the early 2000s, really doesn't do much for the game. While some characters do look better than others, it is definitely something that is hard not to look at when you first are exposed to Marvel Infinite as a game. But I don't feel the graphics are incredibly horrible. Getting closer to the models, you do see the fact that there is upgraded textures, more detail, and there's a lot more present to those characters than a game like Marvel vs. Capcom 3. When you actually take the way the game looks in terms of its color presentation and the way the shading engine works and everything like that, it just comes across as very dry and very bland. Overall, I give the graphics of the game around a 7 out of 10, and my score rating for games is similar to a report card style. So 7 out of 10 is kind of similar to a C, and if you get down to like 5s and stuff like that, well, that's an F, and anything below a 5 kind of just becomes worse and worse and worse from that point forward. So the best way to describe it, average. The graphics are average at best. Some characters look better than others. A lot of the stages don't look fantastic, but some do look really good, similar to the roster. The roster of characters in this game is one of the most interesting aspects of it, and is easily one of its biggest shortcomings. Simply put, if you look at the roster of Marvel Infinite and its 30 characters, it actually is fairly diverse. There are several characters that play a lot different from each other. There is a lot of gameplay variety to be had here. However, the problem is comparing it to its previous games. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, as much as it's not a titled number in the series, is a Marvel vs. Capcom game. So of course, the comparisons are going to be there to the previous titles. Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, X-Men vs. Street Fighter. The legacy of these games does lie with X-Men characters, and their obvious not inclusion is huge and impossible to ignore. The Capcom side is missing key members that made Ultimate Marvel 3 really big, as well as other games like Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and Marvel 1. A lot of the roster, like I said, if you had the 30 characters by themselves, it's okay. It's just that when you compare it to the previous games in the series, that's where it starts to sting a little. However, for me personally, I've got like 3 or 4 characters that I really like playing as, and a good potentially 5 to 6 that I'm actively wanting to learn. So, I mean, I got Strider and I got X, and Strider potentially is like the greatest version of Strider ever in a fighting game in my opinion. So I'm super jazzed about that, but I can't help but feel that so many people are missing characters that were staples in previous games, much less should have been in this one, and it's impossible to ignore that. Along with that, the game's presentation is very lackluster. Between the graphics, the awkward roster, I think all of these things kind of boil down to a presentation category, where we can all include this stuff in the same thing, which is presentation. Much of the previous series is very energetic in this regard, trying to do as much as they can to push the fact that Marvel superheroes and Capcom characters are joining forces or fighting against each other, and that really isn't a huge part of this game, especially in terms of the overall presentation and design of it, unless we're talking about the story mode. Now, I got a lot of feelings about the story mode of this game, and I feel as someone who is a huge Marvel vs. Capcom fan, Marvel vs. Capcom as a series is my favorite series of fighting games out there, and Marvel 1 is one of my favorite fighting games of all time. I should probably be the one that would like the story in a Marvel vs. Capcom game the most. Not this time. While the story mode is completely functional, it is far from being great. Many of the scenarios they put the characters in do make sense, but it all feels extremely forced. A lot of the character dialogue does have quippy references to each other, and some of the stuff, while I did like, 75 to 80% I actively disliked, and a lot of the stuff the characters were saying was just face-palmingly weird. Not to mention, they don't really do much with the story mode itself. The majority of fights you play are against jobber enemies that really don't do much except just take hits. There's no awesome scenarios that set you up for a fight like Tekken 7, which has a lot of hype and build-up. That really never happens in this game. I'd say the most redeemable aspect of Marvel Infinite's story is the really cool part with Hulk and Ryu teaming up to fight things as you protect a city. It's actually kind of awesome. And eventually the final boss. And as many might not dig the way Ultron Sigma Omega looks at the end of this game, I think it's a pretty cool reference to the boss of Mega Man X4, which was Sigma as well. And I think it's a cool, ridiculous-ass Marvel vs. Capcom last boss, so I kinda liked it. But only a couple of aspects doesn't change the fact that the majority of the story mode in this game is horrifically average. And a lot of the story mode is the worst looking in the game in terms of the game's presentation, which is just weird. Many of the cutscenes in the game feature characters that look way worse in the story mode than they do in the actual in-game cinematics. In fact, many of the in-game character artworks that you see, or character CG representations, especially Dante, look really freaking odd, and then you look at Dante in the game, and he looks kind of okay. It's a very, very weird mix between the two, where there was some sort of disconnect during the development of the game in terms of art style, and it just doesn't reflect between the story mode, between the in-game cinematics, between the characters actually fighting in the game, as well as character renders. What the hell was going on? But overall, I think people will find the story mode to be kind of fun. It is enjoyable for a first romp, but I compare it to the Street Fighter V story mode very much. I do not want to play it again after it's over. Next up is sound, and the sound of Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, I'm going to boil down to the hit sound effects as well as the music. The hit sound effects in this game are interesting to say the least. They've taken a much different approach to the sound in this game with a much more futuristic laser style. A lot of the block sounds have a very unique sound effect, the hit sounds have a very unique sound effect, and they don't really sound like punching, kicking, or colliding with faces. They mostly sound like you're punching trash bags, similar to Street Fighter V, and I'm kind of curious what happened in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, because in that game you had multiple different sound effect styles you can choose from, and in this one it's not really there. The music I'd be pretty critical of too, because many of the Marvel superhero characters that are in this game have had their themes ripped from them from previous Marvel vs. Capcom titles, which are quite iconic over the past 20 friggin' years, now replaced with more cinematic scores that more resemble the very, very generic Marvel movie scores. It can be very hard to identify which theme belongs to which character because none of them really have identity except potentially Gamora and a couple of others. The Capcom side, though, is mostly remixes of previous titles from other games, which is kind of refreshing. I'm a big fan of Chris's Resident Evil 5 Mercenaries remix. I think it's really cool. And then as well, Strider's theme is fantastic, and I kind of like X's theme from the Highway stage. Overall, the music, the presentation, the sound, all these things just boil down to the fact that they're not fantastic. If I would give them ratings and scores, it'd be somewhere between a 6 and a 7 for almost all of these things. And it's the stuff that's on the surface level that everyone sees in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, and it's one of the reasons the game isn't doing great critically, especially with a lot of the fan base, because that's all you see, and it's hard to ignore that all the previous games look better in almost every single regard. So, with all that being said, my rating for the game, if it was just based on these aspects alone, would be probably a 6.5. The story mode, while albeit kind of interesting in some ways, is extremely lackluster and takes characters that I love from the Capcom side, if not some from the Marvel side, and puts them in situations that I don't think really do much to make me like the characters more. If not, it actually makes me like some of the characters less. And similar notes can be said about the music, as well as the sound effects, as well as the graphics and presentation. It's between a 6 or a 7. It's just adequate, and compared to the pantheon of the Marvel vs. Capcom series, which has this wonderful legacy of celebrating characters from one side and another, joining forces, if not fighting each other, I don't feel it in this game at all. And it's there, it's kind of there, but it's just not done extremely well. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about is where I might lose a lot of you guys, because I don't think there's many people playing Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite as there would be playing previous Marvel vs. Capcom titles, because they're set off by so much of the other things that are very apparent in this game that are obviously lacking. Some of you guys aren't gonna like this, and I completely understand that, but I would prefer to be honest with you all that are watching, because if I'm not honest with you guys, then I don't feel like I'm making any of the videos I am for the right reasons. And the reason I've waited to do this review quite a bit is so that we can kind of maybe jump over the little bit of a honeymoon period the game has when it does come out, and then get a better understanding of the core mechanics, how things work, how characters are playing out, how the systems are playing out, so I can fully make a very understood review about the game, and I feel I'm ready to do that right now. So let's talk about the gameplay of Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. The biggest thing missing from Infinite is obviously the fact that it goes from 3 vs 3 to 2 vs 2. I talked about this several times in the past, but one of the bigger aspects is the fact that you can tag in and out at any time in Marvel Infinite, which changes the dynamic of a versus game immensely. The setups, situations, combos, and neutral are completely different in this game compared to any other of the versus series, if not any other Capcom fighting game I've ever played. And one of the bigger things about the previous games with Marvel 3 as well as Marvel 2 is that with 3 vs 3 games, you have two characters that are essentially not being used a lot of the time, pretty much boiled down to one or two things they can do as an assist or as a battery character. In this game, you don't really have to worry about that. And when I did play the previous MVC games, it did feel like you use your assists to do a lot of the work, and then you clean up after the assists. I learned to like it a lot over time, but it was one thing that really griped me early with Marvel 2, and it's something that in the other Versus games I liked a lot more, that you did a lot more fighting in X-Men vs. Street Fighter. You did a lot more fighting in Marvel vs. Capcom 1. While that game even had assists, they were limited, meaning that you were kind of jumping in and doing a lot of the combat yourself. Marvel 3's big issue over time was that the game boiled down to touch of death combos as a result of mechanics like X Factor, as well as things that really did not have a lot of thought put into them over the long run. Some characters broke the rules of the system completely, so Marvel vs. Capcom 3 boiled down to you get touched and you die. That is not the case with Marvel Infinite, and many of the issues that Marvel 3 had seem to be directly addressed in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Things like chip damage. You only take significant chip damage when you're in the air in Marvel Infinite. Things like dealing with an incoming mix-up. You can choose 3 different angles your character can enter the screen from because the incoming mix-up was so ridiculously powerful. Marvel 3 ended up potentially being a one-touch kill game because there was only one way your character can jump into the screen after your first one died. And X Factor. Thank God this game does not have X Factor replaced with the Soul system, which allows you to choose a mechanic that each character gets in terms of reality, in terms of space, time. All these do different things, and we've talked about them in the past, and it's much better. Of course, it is a comeback factor technically, but it's not nearly as abrasive as something like X Factor, where you're in a game and you're losing, but you're technically winning. Like I said, most of these things are direct answers to the problems that were present in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and Ultimate Marvel 3, and they've done a pretty damn good job because the game manages to feel refreshing with the characters that it's brought in from the previous game, giving them new stuff while being something completely different than Capcom has ever made. So, in summary, I like the gameplay a lot. In fact, I like playing this game a lot. In fact, I cannot stop playing this game. It's the only thing I can think about playing over the past week it's been out, and I just want to play more. It is that much fun figuring out the different types of team mechanics and synergy you can put together with all the characters in this game. And in fact, the mechanics of the game have made me want to play other characters I never had any interest in ever playing. And this is weird to me because I really liked Marvel vs. Capcom 3, albeit have a few gripes about it. But when I really start thinking about it, and we think about the previous Capcom fighting games like Street Fighter V, like Street Fighter Cross Tekken, going back to Street Fighter 4, I could tell you of several problems I had with all of those games upon the first few weeks of playing them or being exposed to them. And Marvel Infinite, while it absolutely does have really annoying things like Reality Stone right now absolutely everywhere and it being really good and hard to do anything about, nothing makes me really dislike playing the game or wanting to play it less. And putting it into the perspective of all the Capcom fighting games that have been out, all the modern Capcom fighting games, I think I like this one the most of all of them. In fact, I'd go out on a limb, and I'd possibly say that Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite is my favorite Capcom fighting game since Capcom vs. SNK 2. That's right, it's been 16 years of Capcom fighting games that I've enjoyed, I thought were good, but I didn't want to keep playing as much as I am playing this. And of course, it is week 1, but I do have vivid memories of me playing all those other games, and I never felt this way about any of them. I do truly feel the gameplay in Marvel Infinite is something special, and it is complemented with the fact that Marvel Infinite's online is the best attempt at online that Capcom has ever made for one of their first-party big fighting games. Not including stuff like Iron Galaxy with Marvel vs. Capcom Origins, as well as Darkstalkers and Third Strike Online. Those are great. But Marvel Infinite, in terms of a take of Capcom doing their own fighting game, like a brand new one, has got the best online of any of them. Completely eliminating the problems of Street Fighter V server issues, you get the best netcode of any versus game I've ever played, much less any of the modern Capcom fighting games. And all the systems just seem to work. A lot of the things that you're looking for just seem to work. The only kind of trouble I've had is that sometimes matchmaking can act a little bit weird and you have to go into training mode to get more matches. But many of the things that were problems in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, if not problems in Street Fighter V, have been addressed with this game, which is really good to say the least. Overall, playing this game online is an absolute dream. Learning stuff with the characters is a dream, and overall, I just want more characters. I want more awesome characters because that's the biggest missing thing from Marvel Infinite. I just want to do stuff with really awesome classic members, the more popular ones that should have made it into this game. And seeing the fact that Monster Hunter looks as good as she does, that we're going to get Venom pretty soon, that we're going to get Sigma, like, these characters are going to make the game look a lot better, but it's definitely not going to help the fact that, man, that presentation and art style is a really hard pill to swallow. Overall, I'm going to give my online experience, as well as the gameplay of Marvel Infinite, probably a 10, and overall. The online, I'm going to say, is about like a 9, somewhere around that, but the gameplay is like a 10 out of 10, one of my favorite Capcom fighting games ever. And it definitely temporarily heals the fact that you have this really rough art style when you're playing the game. That does go away for a moment, but then you rip the band-aid off and you're immediately exposed to a really crazy looking character windscreen with a funky looking Dante, if a not so detailed looking character model for some other character in the game, and you're brought back to reality really fast. But it's that gameplay that constantly brings me back. Jumping online, finding matches, getting people that are equal enough skill, and the game is just so much goddamn fun. And it's not the same for myself. Almost everyone else that has reviewed this game says the same thing. And I kind of wanted to wait a bit to get a better understanding of it, to make a more comprehensive review. And even after all the time, even after like me playing the game at previous events and kind of ending up being excited after I was exposed to how the gameplay is, all the way until now, I still love it. I want to do nothing else at the moment but play this game, and that's a really weird feeling. I haven't really felt that for many other fighting games since, I'd say, Killer Instinct back in 2013, and maybe a little bit from Mortal Kombat X back in 2015. I just wanted nothing but to play those games when they came out, and Marvel Infinite is definitely scratching that itch right now. So if we're going to take everything into consideration, like I said, the overall presentation, sound, and graphics, and everything that composes the roster being about a 6.5 out of 10, and then we have the online being a 9, as well as the gameplay being a 10, I'm gonna round Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite score to around an 8. I think this game is a solid B, which is not what we were expecting from a Marvel vs. Capcom title by any means. Usually these games are meant to be fantastic celebrations of both Marvel characters and Capcom characters, and it only really seems to be a fantastic celebration of gameplay ideas and mechanics. But I do still have some characters that I really love, so I'm kind of happy with the way the game is at the moment, but it doesn't mean that, good God, dude, it's gonna be so much better when we get X-Men characters, if we get X-Men characters, and other Capcom characters that have been missing from previous Marvel vs. Capcom games. I can only imagine when they're added to Marvel Infinite with this gameplay style, because it is so good. All I want now is more characters to put into this system and do awesome things with them. I do think there's many steps that Capcom and Marvel can take from this point forward. I don't know how good the sales are going to be for this game, but I don't anticipate them being great by any means, because the overall memeing and the overall E3 presentation and the story mode demo didn't do this game a lot of favors, and they focus so much on the story of Marvel Infinite in all of the marketing plans for the game, that's all that people saw, and it never really looked good. So no one anticipates that the game is going to be good, because the story mode isn't going to be what sells this game. Really cool looking fighting games are what sell fighting games for the most part, and this game obviously is lacking in that department. Underneath that rough skin, underneath the kind of trashy appearance that the game could kind of have, looking like a much older fighting game, is something really special on the inside. I compare it to King of Fighters 14 a lot, because KOF 14 came out looking rough, got a graphics update, looked a bit better, but at all times, KOF 14 was an incredibly fun fighting game at its core, and the characters were so unique, the mechanics so refined, you can do so much with it, and Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite is now in a similar situation where the presentation and graphics have brought it down so low in terms of how the general casual audience sees it, that they might not even ever get a chance to play the game at all. And would I convince you guys to play a game like Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite? Absolutely. I think you should definitely play this. Should you buy it? That's kind of up to you. In a situation like this, I know that graphics are important for fighting games, so it's kind of hard to tell someone that you should go buy this game when so much of it is a 6.5 out of 10. It's hard to tell someone that you should go buy this game when it seems so much of the effort went into a story mode that is just subpar, to say the least. But really down to the gameplay, that's the most important part, and that's the part that I think you guys should experience in some way. Whether or not it's going to a friend's house, renting the game, playing it online for a little bit in some way or another, that is something special, and it is really, really damn awesome to figure things out with your characters in this game. And if not, like I said, it's one of the best damn Capcom fighting games at its core since Capcom vs. SNK 2. So that's it. Marvel vs. Capcom on my end gets an 8 out of 10. It's a B because they put a lot of effort into the gameplay, and it didn't seem like they put a lot of effort into the presentation. As always, dudes, thank you a ton for watching. I'll be back making a lot more videos about this game, especially playing matches online, learning a variety of characters, because that's where things shine the most. I definitely don't want to go through the story mode again. As always, dudes, thank you a ton for watching. My name is Max, and I'll see you next time.